looks like I am live on mine. I'm going to check audio levels.
Okay.
Is it possible to accidentally spit in one's own eye?
I just hit start stream and record at the same time when you said that. Way to go and how to start it, Mitch. Thanks.
Well, you know,
Nice.
I do deal with the unknown.
I mean, that's how you go blind, isn't it?
It's one way.
Alright, I think my levels are good.
Why do I feel like we're trying to launch a space shuttle?
Because we are, in a sense. When you said that. Way to go and how to start it.
All this wonderful technology they keep trying to convince us of.
Ooh, I have an angry Maddie House of Geek tapping her foot. I'm working on Cuban time here, so all should be forgiven. Don't throw your chincleta at me.
Oh no, you're gonna adopt an accent? I'm not prepared for this.
Yeah, I can't hear through accents.
I mean, all I've got is like, I could do either Schwarzenegger, Stallone, or drunk. If it's a good day, I can do drunk Obi-Wan Kenobi, but that's about it.
Nice.
So, hello, Maddie. Welcome. I am joined, though you can't see them, by Mitch the Ripper, who you do know, and by a Catholic Wesley, who you don't know, but you will quickly become acquainted with.
Greetings.
Groovy.
All right. I don't know how far along we're on your side. Yes, we are trying to do the weird multicasting. We will try not to cross the streams, but no promises. I only wish...
Channel boy. There it is.
I only wish that I actually had my soundboard up because, up and prepared because I would have the Shut Up Wesley ready and waiting, but I don't, so there will be no shut-ups of the Wesleys. Yes, I know, Grimwood, it's okay. So.
Oh, wow, that's bright light. There we go. Okay.
I spent the last 30 minutes preparing for that.
Yes.
No, I think he was referring to me, but yes. Yes, I was. No, I spent the last 30 minutes preparing the little graphic that I have on my screen. For those who might be familiar with a certain doctor of sorts, just so that Wesley gets the reference, I will share the graphic with him too. And he should be able to get it and understand. But for those who are on my side, obviously you can see my thumbnail there.
I do admit to some confusion. I don't know who's taking the lead on this operation.
All right. Well, the topic, if I remember or discern correctly from Wesley, is we wanted to kind of start
exploring
apart the whole identity politics kind of thing and see if we can get some understanding on some of it.
Sure.
Right. Okay.
Sure. If I may, I originally had posed a few basic questions. I'm a fan of philosophy. I have a degree in theology. I love to analyze social movements and worldviews, comparative philosophical thoughts, and so on and so forth. So my question was along the lines of, what is identity? How is it constructed? And when I ask these questions, I ask them not in general or how we might necessarily answer those questions, but how certain individuals in our modern times seem to answer those questions, such that an individual identifies as something, and that this something is a part of their identity. And it becomes a social demand almost that the only way for one to accept or love a person is to accept their identity and what it is and how they identify, and vice versa. If you do not, then you just by default, ipso facto, hate them. So there isn't a bifurcation, a division, so to speak, or a compartmentalized conception of, or a difference between a person as a human being in a sense that transcends all the things that we have come to associate concerning ourselves and those things themselves.
What? Sorry, I couldn't resist doing that.
That's basically what the nonsense kind of boils down to.
Well, I would kind of approach it a different way, I think, insofar as to first understand your identity, I think, or one's identity. Let's do it that way. To understand one's identity, one must first recognize how they passively and actively identify themselves, I would think.
What do you mean?
Well, passive is just you go about your business, your day-to-day routine, whatever it may be. Maybe you go to work, maybe you go down to the gym, maybe you go to a cafe. It doesn't matter. But you
go meet a guy named Jim.
Okay, but you go about your daily routine,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say that's your passive identity, is just doing what you do for whatever reason you're doing it. It's not a conscious decision. Actively identifying yourself is when you say, I am a, and then, you follow that with some descriptor. I think there's a bit of a difference between the passive and active identity.
Basically, what you do versus what you say.
Yeah, pretty much.
I could see that.
Anyone else?
Oh, okay. Well, when I was listening to you talk, I was thinking in terms of the difference between being and acting. In a sense, there's a lot of things that are inherently about myself that is just there, and then how that gets expressed. For some people, these could be even two different things. There could be a private life, and there can be the facade that they keep on, and then the public life. Yeah. Is that what you mean?
I believe so, but not so much the private life and the public life, because both of those are sort of conscious. One's a conscious decision, just simply by dint of the fact that the other is a conscious decision, if you know what I mean.
I think
Out in
it's
the world,
more.
out in the world, I decide that I want to portray this image, but when I get behind closed doors, I'm consciously taking that facade down and just being who I am.
Sure. So let me approach this from another angle. I'm the kind of person that can love anybody simply on the basis of them being a human being. They can, an individual, if they so choose, can identify with a very long list of descriptors. Those descriptors could be anything. And I may agree with or not agree with those descriptions simply because I have, my own understanding of human nature and so on and so forth. But I have the ability to love people for being people. But it almost seems like, and I've had people even come to me and say, well, why can't you just accept us for who we are? Why can't you just love us? And my response is always, sure, I'll love you. But what they really mean is how they identify. You have to love that too. If you don't support how they identify, then you don't support them. There's it's the same thing to them. In my mind, it's almost enmeshed because I have friends that have thoughts about all kinds of different things. None of them really become a factor as to whether or not I accept them, whether I love them. But I think my understanding of them is a much deeper aspect of the human person that transcends anything that they could possibly try and to identify with.
Are we talking about identity politics?
Yes.
Okay, because that's where it gets it can get squishy and messy when it comes to identity politics, because on the one hand, I think most of us don't really want to if you know what I mean by that. We don't go out of our way going, I'm looking for someone who identifies as X so I can pick on them. Some people do. I'm not denying
I was
that.
going to say some people do, and we've seen examples of that
Yes.
as of recent.
I think that people in general don't do that. They probably do it more online than they do in the real world.
Normal people, flat out, don't do that.
I believe there's any such thing as normal people, because everyone's got their things.
Well, here's a perfect example: Jessica Yaniv, and is by no means a normal person. But said individual uses the facade of identity to go out and target others.
Well, then
Mostly the women of-
that's the active identity.
Yeah.
But the passive identity, when you get through all of the layers of all the surface layers,
Are you still talking, Mitch? Because there are times where you break up, like, in the middle of a sentence. Or is that me?
No. On two occasions, he's been talking, and then in mid-sentence, I will hear nothing.
Okay. I do know that he mentioned that he was having some computer complications.
what happened?
You would start talking, and, like, right in the middle of your sentence, you would stop. As
Oh,
if you're not
fantastic.
having a completed thought. And then you would say something like, you know what I mean? And we're like, we didn't hear the whole of that sentence.
Okay. I'll try to start over, see if I can remember what I was getting at. I get sidetracked, that's part of my identity. I couldn't help it. Let's okay. I don't want to pick on one person by name, so I'm gonna scratch that idea. Let's say one person is a I don't know what all the identities are, so it's hard to pick one. Star Trek fan. Let's do Star Trek fan. That's easy.
Yeah, sure.
One person's a Star Trek fan, and that Star Trek fan insists that everyone around them at all times discuss Star Trek and the wonders of Star Trek, and ooh, look, Spock has a phaser because Star Trek, and all that good stuff. Now, there's a point at which you and I and everyone else is like, hey, I don't want to talk Star Trek just now. I just slammed my hand in a car door. Star Trek is not at the top of my list of things to discuss at this particular moment. And if that person, knowing that I've slammed my hand in the car door, wants to continue speaking or talking about Star Trek in spite of my wounded appendage, that person is a jerk, and there's no getting around it. So I think that person being a jerk is probably a passive identity trait.
Passive identity trait of a Star Trek.
But I think what I was getting at is some people are just jerks, and most of us don't want to be jerks. Sometimes we don't know we're being jerks. So but there are those people who do make the conscious decision to to constantly lay upon you that thing which they choose as an identity.
I'm sorry, I'm still going back to the passive Star Trek fan, and I think that's. I don't think you can actually use that correctly, those words correctly in the same sentence.
Possibly not. But I mean, do you see what I'm getting at, though?
I
There are some people who are jerks, no matter how polite the veneer they wear.
Yes, I think it would be more interesting as to try to delve into maybe why. We know that they are. We know that they exist. We know that they do. The question is, why do they do it?
Oh, that's. I'm assuming there's an element of emotional gratification at play. To force that thing onto other people gratifies something within them. Maybe they can't identify it. I don't know.
Maybe along the lines of some kind of self-validity?
Possibly. And people who haven't learned to seek validity from within themselves instead of from without. Or I should say validation, I suppose, to be grammatically correct.
Yes, I know, because Maddie is a grammar Nazi, so we don't want to anger her. Although I'm sure there's many words that we make up on air that we get thousands of eye twitches for.
I know I do.
Death by 1,000 eye twitches. Maddie says they want to validate and
Yeah. Oh, I've got gas.
be validated. Okay, they want to be validated. But again, yeah, that comes down to, as you mentioned, from within versus from without. It's, in my opinion, a very interesting phenomena that for people who don't seek constant attention, constant praise, that they just do, and people build models, and that's the gratification that they get is in the act of doing, in the act of participating, versus just, I am here, acknowledge me. I don't know if it comes from a sense of boredom or self-esteem, or even just, the other word was on the tip of my tongue, and I
Ego?
No. I mean, that's part of it, but that's not what I was going to. It's insecurity issues. There we go.
One thing I was thinking, and it is true, sometimes a person who has a superiority complex is actually hiding a inferiority complex, that they're overcompensating for on the outside for how they actually feel on the inside. I think if a person's identity or how they seem to understand themselves is that fragile, that it needs constant validation, I wonder at what point does reason actually kick in and confront them on maybe they are not what they are trying to portray themselves as, or maybe they're not objectively what they believe themselves to be.
Maddie says they also seek to get validated to the detriment of others. For example, speaking for a group, whether that group needs them to or not. At that point, and I've heard the argument, well, it's for it. They're being altruistic. They're putting their needs above their own. We've seen examples of this. I think last year in the DNC, there was this woman who was, I think and she's white, so she says, wait, people just need to step aside, and we need to make way for people of color, her words, people of color, and it's like you think you might be altruistic, but really you're still making this about you because you're making yourself a martyr. You're making yourself an example to try to lead others by. So you're really not stepping aside for anyone. You're still making it about yourself.
Well, yeah.
Rather than saying, let's work on a solution together. Let's work on hammering out our ideas and coming up with practical ways of implementing them so that we don't put others down, because you'd think they'd figure out by now, if you put other people down at yours or someone else's expense, you're just going to end up driving people away, as Maddie mentioned, to the detriment of others. And how condescending that you put yourself on such a high pedestal to say, we have to step aside to let others. It's like, so in a way, you're kind of saying you're already better than them, already more privileged, when, I mean, in their minds, they might think so, but the idea is to dispel this notion of more privileged, or being oppressed. Is like, we're all human. We might not start off with the same circumstances, but we as a society are trying to go in the same direction. We're trying to make things just a little bit better every single day for ourselves and other people.
If I may say, when you mentioned oppressed, I couldn't help to think to myself that, well, in my mind, what I think is the most valuable thing that humanity can do together, given the fact that the range of human thought is so broad, and we are so diverse in so many different ways. And while we may not, agree with or necessarily appreciate all of the differences, we recognize the differences as being an expression of the condition of the human person, as part of the human experience. And I've always been under the impression that tolerance and diversity were, well, virtues, something that should be upheld and strive for. But when a person, sets themselves out to be, well, I'm the most, who is the most oppressed, and it becomes like a war between, or a hierarchy of those who are most oppressed and those who are the least oppressed. It almost,
I would say it becomes a competition of who's the most oppressed. Not necessarily a war, but it's almost like they have to find something, ways of outdoing each other to get to that peak of oppression. Say, I am the most disadvantaged, therefore you need to listen to me and do what I say, because somehow these negatives make me an expert on what to do.
what's interesting is that, in a sense,
Sorry to interrupt.
People like to have something to fight for so that it feels meaningful. And sometimes I wonder if this is their way of trying to create some sort of meaning that, perhaps they're that empty, or their identity is so fragile, their understanding of who they are is perhaps so weak that they have to create this oppression and almost, in a sense, oppress themselves so that they can have an agenda, or they can have something to fight against, to struggle against, and in a sense to create meaning out of this attempt.
Isn't it interesting that in times of strife, people usually unite to work past it, and the working past it is what actually gives them some sort of meaning, some sort of
Commonality.
Let's go to wartime, World War I, World War II.
What happened?
Well, the wars happened. That's one thing. But men went off to war. They were fighting for their country. That being a patriot, the act of doing, in itself is an identity. But then you have the men who leave. So what do the women do? Well, jobs still need to be done. You had factory workers. You had uh, basically the jobs that majority were taken by men became women's jobs now. Even going to something as simple as baseball. To work as a team to do something, it wasn't simply that they were women, but they were women baseball players now. They were they didn't just see themselves as women, though. They saw themselves as baseball players. So the war started to end. Men were coming back. Don't need the women anymore to play. But there were those who advocated that they do so because now this act of playing baseball, this sense of purpose and meaning to play, to entertain, to be something, became their identity. This doesn't necessarily pertain to identity politics, but I wonder if it's along the same vein of mentality. I had seen an experiment done where they had taken 5 separate individuals into a warehouse, and in the warehouse they had soundproof shipping containers that were basically makeshift into like living quarters, and that they would basically be put into a more comfortable isolation for 5 days. And the experiment was to see, could you last 5 days in isolation? No communication, no human contact, no electronics. In fact, I think the only thing that they were allowed to have that was electrical were the lights that were provided in the containers. They were allowed to bring 3 personal items with them that were of a non-communicative and non-electrical manner to help entertain them for those 5 days. Wow. One person thought that they could go the straight 5 days. Like, yeah, no worries. I use it in social media all the time. She did not even last 12 hours. Did not last 12 hours. You know, they had like a buzzer, like, you know, I'm ready to tap out. There was somebody else who had tapped out maybe just a little after day 1. One of the remaining 3 had a book with them. They had brought a book. There's only so much reading that you can do to entertain your mind. And so by day 3, they had tapped out. The other 2 lasted the full 5 days. And they had with them either some sort of materials to paint or compose, whether it was, I couldn't remember if it was writing or if it music or a combination of both. But it got me thinking, now recalling this story, that's something that comes from inside of them. That they don't have to be as beholden and dependent for outside influences. That they can create and they can do. And this is their identity. This is what makes them them. This is what makes them who they are in the grand scheme of things. There was a Bill Whittle podcast that I had listened to, and I can't remember if it was Bill or if it was his friend who had made the comment on the podcast. Then this went along the lines of identity politics in like art and music and films. It's like it used to be who I am creates the art, but nowadays it's who I am is the art. Like somehow again, this activism, this social justice, this identity politics is performative.
It really is. That's not to say it's an act.
I believe no, it's to them, to most of them, it's not. They legit believe that this activism is who they're supposed to be.
Right.
That by
But they've also been told that. I mean, they've been told that kind of thing through schooling. They've been told how they're supposed to feel and react by parents who don't understand that children don't fully form as cognizant people for nearly 2 decades. I mean, yeah, it's a process. I mean, it's not like, boom, 2 decades, now you're a person. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are certain higher brain functions that take time to develop, and a lot of parents just don't seem to be aware of that.
I wonder if that's partially due to the parenting styles of like helicoptering and whatnot. If you don't allow children to experience adversity or experience hardship, that it becomes a deficiency in the development of their character, and therefore
It does.
deficiency in their self-identity that is
it
not
really does.
related to outside forces.
It's like those people who raise their kids in the proverbial plastic bubble, where the kid is never exposed to germs. And then, the second the kid gets out into the real world after turning 18, boom, they catch the virus that turns their internal organs to liquid feces. And yeah, I mean, it turns out to be not a big superbug. It's just something common like the flu or the common cold. But their immune system has not been allowed to develop. So they have no antibodies. Emotions and emotional health operate very much the same way. When we're growing up, we learn, we're first told that we can't have something that we want, and we have a fit about it because we want it, and that's all we know. But we learn over time.
But I want one more cookie, Uncle Mitch.
Exactly.
Just want one more cookie.
No.
Give me the cookie.
No cookie. But then over time, we do develop the ability to cope with being told no. And then we develop the ability to cope with not being as good at this thing as the other kid is. But that's been that's being robbed from us too, because now everyone gets a trophy. And that emotional toughening up is not allowed to happen. Even the zero tolerance policy for bullying, and I'm not a fan of bullying, but I do recognize that there is a point at which it hasn't gone too far that is actually healthy for a kid to endure, because it teaches them to cope with those kinds of people in real life.
Cope and fight back.
In some cases, yes.
Basically building up your defense, just like with anything else, just like your immune system.
Right. I mean, emotionally, you do have to build a callus.
Right. What is it? This was maybe a year or so ago that I had made the comment, like bullying is just a more aggressive form of what mammals regard as play, because play helps establish at a younger age dominance.
Yes.
And sometimes if you do it right, your bullies can actually become your best friends.
They can. But again, there is also that point at which the bullying has gone too far. And that's an issue that needs to be paid attention to as well. I mean, we do have to pay attention, but a zero tolerance policy, just because Mikey calls Jimmy a doo-doo head, well, that's not bullying.
Well, I did that in school once. I got in trouble because everybody thought I was being racist. Because the kid I called the doo-doo head was black. Oh,
But you know,
man.
you rob a kid of those learning experiences. What do you think that kid's going to turn into as an adult?
A maladjusted, uh, grown-up toddler.
Pretty much, it's going to be an adult-sized child in a way. And I'm not saying child as an insult. I'm saying child insofar as they haven't learned these
Infantile
things.
mentality.
Even that comes across as insulting, and that's not what I'm going for. Because it's not meant as an insult. It's I'm meaning it very diagnostically.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, we have a new person in the chat. Hello, probably not Dad. Welcome.
Probably.
Oh, no, racist spotted guys.
But there's another element to it too.
In my defense, I was 7.
There is another element at play, and that element, which we often call virtue signaling, is actually a symptom of a sense of moral supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, it's a way to establish dominance. I don't use profanity. People who use profanity have a limited vocabulary. I'll kiss my ass. It's a faulty thought right on the surface, because if you don't use profanity, you've decided not to use certain words. You have a limited vocabulary.
Well, wait. Well, wait a minute. It's also a way to language police, because
Yes.
sometimes a profane word adds the right amount of shock or the right amount of emphasis in what you're trying to get across to get somebody's attention. That's what it's there for.
Right. Profanity is a modifier.
Thank you. What it is that if they're trying to language police you into not using that, they're trying to take away your ability to convey your message the way that you best mean how to convey it. It's the
No,
same
they're
thing.
not.
Well,
They're not
hold
interested
on.
in that. No.
No. Yes,
I think you're.
yes, they are, and I will tell you why. It's the same mentality that you get out of these college students, where they're like, you have to use these new terminologies like unconscious bias and all of these other things. Like, if you're not using these words when you're discussing these, then you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, no, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just refusing to use your terminology
Yeah.
because you're trying to get me to subscribe to a line of thinking that I don't agree with.
Right.
Because in order to use these words, I have to agree with its meaning, and I don't.
Right.
I'm saying that it's not the conscious thing they think of when they're doing that profanity thing at you.
No, but it's a trained reaction. They're not technically thinking about it, but it's a trained reaction.
No, it's a side effect, basically.
Just like if they happen to see somebody with who is bald, who has a shaved head walking down the street, and they're white, oh, they must be a Nazi because only Nazis are skinheads.
Right.
I thought they had blonde hair.
I don't know.
I mean,
Their head honcho didn't look blonde to me.
Nor nor German.
Yeah. He did kill that mustache style for everyone.
Yeah. Bad people are ruining good things for everyone.
the games.
But it's a combination of factors is what it is. There's no one magic thing that does it.
No,
that
and
makes that-
I'm not saying like we need to get rid of all of these things and then we'll have a perfect utopia. Hell no. In this case, I'll go a little more on the chaotic side. It's like I'd like a little bit of chaos, please, but in the opposite direction. Thank you.
But it's a fascinating thing to explore.
It is. That is why we're here, because as we shuffle through this world and things are going to get more hectic in the next 7 months, we're going to be, I honestly think we're going to start seeing a deterioration. We already kind of started to. Not as as a society as a whole, but of like something's got to break. And if the pendulum is already swinging in the opposite direction of nationalization, patriotism, focusing on the identity of the individual as opposed to the group, the herd mentality, at some point the sheepdog's going to come in and break up the flock.
Yep. What about you, Wesley? Where were you at this moment on this?
Yeah, I know. Mitch and I have just been going back and forth. I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm actually partially distracted a little bit, but
Black helicopters again? I get that a lot.
yeah, black cars too. No, there isn't anything that I'm hearing that I disagree with, and what I'm hearing has been expressed so well, it doesn't seem to be anything I would like to add or extrapolate upon. I can say that some of my recent experiences are they have been very trying and difficult experiences in dealing with people in a new way that I don't think I've had to deal with in the past. I've been subject to cancel culture quite a bit on and off over the past year, and I'm running into people with mentalities that I've never had to address. I've never had to respond to it before. I lack. I'm nothing like these people, so it's so foreign to me. I don't understand it, and it's taken quite a while, lots of conversations with the different types of folk to try to pin down exactly what people are doing, because, as I explained, I have a degree in theology, and I like to dabble in philosophy a lot, so I always break things down to presuppositions and worldviews, and I try to understand and analyze people, and I guess expect them to think and only act out of reason. And the difficulty that I'm having is that I'm trying to have logical conversations with emotionally irate people. I'm trying to reason with people who reason isn't the basis for what they're striving for. They're striving for something else, like we've touched upon, self-validation. The word selfishness comes to mind as well. And it's so blatant and so
unapologetic.
And what's even worse is that in their mind, they are the white knights. They are. It's almost like a moral imperative that they do these things. It's not just justifiable, but it's.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean by moral supremacy.
Yes, yeah, and you touched upon that as well. So that certainly came to mind and clicked as well. That not only do they do these things and draw a sense of self from it, I suppose, they encourage others to do it as well, and basically hate people that don't. And I think that's what bothers me the most, is that these people will say to you, well, you're a hateful person because you think this. But then they can trash you, they can attack you, they can destroy your life, they can do... It doesn't make...
It's like they're guilty of what they accuse you of doing.
Well, worse.
And worse.
Well, yes, actually.
Not or worse, and worse.
Yeah.
It's a common thing in people who are bent upon imposing their will, that they do accuse you of that for which they are already guilty.
And they refuse to self-reflect.
That too. But I've noticed this pattern, especially in a gal who was dating someone I know. She always accused him of cheating. I mean, and he spent pretty much every waking hour in a place where she could contact him at a moment's notice either at work or on his way home or pulling into the driveway. You know, that kind of thing. He stayed well within her field of view, let's say, and she would still accuse him of cheating. And it turns out that, you know, that if he had a couple of hours where she wasn't calling him all the time, turns out she was going and getting her nasty on.
And you want to know why the idea of this as probably not dad projection is so prevalent is because, again, they aren't able to self-reflect, but because they assume that the only reason you do the things because the only reason you do the things that you do is because you're hateful, is because they're the ones that have those kind of thoughts, because they acted out on others. As if there's no other particular reason for disassociating, stating your views, any possible thing. They are that paranoid because they think these things.
Yep.
Because they've been told you have to look at the world in black and white, and anything that doesn't fit in this box must fit in this other box of reasoning that makes the world make sense of it's either is or isn't. It's like, well, yes, it's either is or isn't, but there's different reasons as to why there is or isn't. Let's take a very basic knowledge of a switchboard that has a couple of different connectors. Well, if you flip the switch on and it doesn't turn on, there's at least 12 different things that you could try to figure out why the current is not flowing to turn the light bulb on. And you have to kind of dissect it. It's not just, oh, well, the switch is bad. It's like, well, the switch could be bad. Or maybe it's the resistors. Or it's the transistors. Maybe something wasn't soldered correctly.
Maybe you didn't plug the damn thing in.
Or you didn't just plug the damn thing in. I was going to say, maybe the filament in the bulb is already busted.
Yeah, but you don't throw away a house because a light bulb burnt out.
I get, it's interesting. I kept coming at some of the circumstances that I have experienced from the standpoint of just one worldview versus another sort of thing. And from what I've been getting from this conversation is we're actually dealing with like a permanent state of adolescence. We're dealing with people who never learned how to dialogue with opposing views. We've people who haven't grown and matured through that trial process of hashing out their ideas with people who are different from them. So they've never learned how to be friends with people who have different ideas.
Right. All they know how to be is pseudo-political allies.
Or compromise. They've never learned how to compromise.
No, you never compromise. I'm really getting I'm developing this mindset that is anti-compromise.
Well, there's a difference between compromising with people who are unwilling to compromise, and then there's a difference with people who are.
Well, my thing
because
is all about it's all about the liberty thing. To compromise with tyranny is to support tyranny.
Well, but that's a different type of compromising. I'm talking about something like, well, I did the dishes today, so if you could do them tomorrow, but I'll do the laundry instead, kind of thing.
Right.
Where it's like, no, I cook and I clean, I do this, I do that, or I'm the breadwinner of the house, so you have to do everything. It's like, no. We got to kind of work together. Yeah, you might be the breadwinner of the house, whether it is man or woman. At that point, it doesn't matter. It's like you both have a household to help maintain. You got to work together. Just one being the breadwinner and one being the caretaker honestly is not a sufficient enough compromise. You still have to work together. You still have to figure out and sort the bills. You still have to take care of the kids as a unit. It's not separate.
Probably not. Dad makes a really good point. Schools getting rid of debate teams was an awful thing to have happened.
And shop and arts have always been threatened, or at least
Well, yeah.
defunded.
Take out the arts and look at where it's put us now. Art, I don't care what anyone. It's art is about expression of the inner self. You know, it's not.
Yeah, exploration of the inner self, and that's where we derive a
Right.
healthy type of.
Identity. Exactly. And without that, I mean, but to put it in other terms, when's the last time we've had one of the so-called guitar gods?
Who?
You don't. You may not. You may be before your time, Nina.
Yeah, I mean, you probably are the elder among us, so.
I would say, yeah. But no, back in starting in the 70s and 80s, you would have what were called the guitar gods. These were people who were in music and entertainment. In other words, artistically, they were the people who were the top of the game, and they were well known for it. And they and other people, they inspired other people to also elevate themselves to that kind of a standard of exceptionalism. And it's kind of gone away now because our art, in this case music, has turned to something that's more of a prepackaged and canned variety.
Well, it's not just music, but
No, it isn't, but I'm using music as the example.
Well, but I'll tell you this.
I mean, now we
There's-
have people who wipe their butts on a canvas and say, I made Jesus.
Yeah, well,
And that's, come on.
but quite honestly, there are a lot more people than I think there are, because I'm trying to be on the liberal side of that. There are a lot more people that can see past the facade. It's just they're more or less likely not to say anything to not rattle the cage.
Yeah.
There still is a standard for the arts. It's just you can't really say much without getting barraged. And if you're not ready for it, you're just best to not say anything.
Well, that's the other thing that went away.
Not with Ricky Gervais, though. I got to take off my headset for just 1 second.
Ruby.
But please continue talking.
I think I might have run out, but it's true though. And as far as music, I think music's a great example because it's one everyone can relate to. We don't have that level of exceptional musicianship anymore. Or actually, no, that's not true. We do. It's not promoted. It used to be promoted. Now we get Taylor Swift, which is one version of the same thing this week, and next week it's going to be the same version of the same thing, but with less auto-tune. and I mean, and it's still gonna be the it's still going to aspire to mediocrity, and there will be nothing outstanding about it. The only reason Taylor Swift sells in a field of stuff that is so much better, hey Ghost Dog,
Hey, Ghost Dog.
is because her act is pushed by the establishment in the music industry. That's it. There's nothing else there that she does that's exceptional. I mean, Debbie Gibson was this similar act back in the 80s. But Debbie Gibson, even though she was all teenage popcorn and bubblegum music, she at least wrote and produced her first album. I mean, and that's talent beyond. I mean, and she was, I think, only in her 20s, early 20s at the time, and that, especially back then when you didn't have all the computers and digital post-processing and all that good stuff that you do today.
You know, when you actually had to have talent
Yeah, when you had to have talent and know-how.
and no autotune.
And she released a huge hit. Her album was a huge hit. I mean, I think the closest we come to a Debbie Gibson today is probably, I hate to say it, Lady Gaga. Say what you want about Lady Gaga. Look at her funny because, lady, that is not how you dress. Or whatever your reason for the sideways eye is, that's perfectly fine. but Lady Gaga is actually talented. She is a talented musician and a talented performer and singer. Yes, she's one of the ones that actually has the talent. There's not a lot of auto-tune and whatnot going on with Lady Gaga. I'm sure it's there because she likes to her style of music does lean a little bit into the experimental, and I can appreciate auto-tune on that level, but when it becomes the main instrument in your act, forget about it. Get out of my club.
Now we're talking about the woman who wore a meat dress.
That's what I'm talking about. I'll look at
To
her
be
sideways
honest,
all day long.
shock and awe.
For
Shock and awe.
shopping for clothing at a butcher's shop, I will look at her sideways all day long for that. But I respect her on the musical level because there's something to it, you know. Yeah, I would agree, Maddie. She squanders her talent with pop music, and her jazz stuff is just it's wow. And we have this
more
thing.
than jazz at the moment, though.
We have this thing today where no one is given the exceptional as a thing to which they should be aspiring to. Instead, all we have is mediocrity.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think on some level, most people know that, and it's depressing the hell out of them. And that might be another reason we have this expression of
Oh, thank you for the subscribers, dog.
this big angsty kind of expressiveness that's going on.
I think you touched upon something here that's in a sense quite profound. You know, the virtues of seeking what is true, good, and beautiful. You know, when we were looking at talent, we're looking at exceptionalism. We've lost a certain depth to which the human soul can search,
Aspire.
and,
Yes.
and the heights to which we can aspire as well. Both of those things, both in excelling in something and also being able to, you know, self-reflect that interpersonal life. Because I mean, when I'm listening to you folks talk, it's actually enriching, it's inspiring, it's deep, and it's intellectual, and it's inherently meaningful.
I'm insulted, sir. I am no way at all some kind of intellect.
I was talking about him.
I lack all depth in a challenging state otherwise. I am a repeat offender. I repeat, I will offend again.
But doesn't that come to the crux of it? And I think I've identified another piece. I've said it before, though, but it kind of all ties together. The increase in mediocrity comes to the lack of trying. So
Yeah, if you don't try, you can't fail.
Well, no, but it comes to that's why we have a lack of exceptionalism. And why do you need to be exceptional if everybody gets a trophy for just showing up?
Well, exactly. That's what I mean. That participation trophy is not only the thing that prevents you from striving for anything beyond presence, I guess,
Presidents!
but it also robs you of the ability to cope with failure. And what a sad thing.
What possible benefit is there to society, or even parents for that matter, to actually shape and mold our next generation in this manner?
They don't, is the problem. There is no shaping and molding going on. The schools are conformity centers at this point. They no longer teach you they no longer teach you how to think. They teach you what to think. And if you step out of line, you're going to be diagnosed with a mental disorder of some sort and drugged into behavior. And that by itself is a frightening prospect. But then, as if that weren't enough, we have parents who don't want to be parents. They want to have a kid and the reason they want to have a kid is so they can say, hey, I have a kid. How come I can't get a seat in the restaurant before these other people? They don't have a kid. My kid's hungry. I want to talk to the manager. Shut up, Karen. You know, that we have that kind of people raising kids too. And it's a bad combination. It is really a recipe for all kinds of societal disaster.
Which let me reinforce my question with, well, to what end? What's the end game? What do they hope to gain from?
Control.
Yeah.
Wait, first, who is they in your question?
No, it doesn't matter.
No, it
They-
does. It does. Trust me.
Okay.
Who is the they to which you refer?
The examples that you're giving, the school systems, the parents.
Oh, it's path of least resistance kind of thing. You know, I've spent my 10 minutes pretending to be a parent because the kid got in trouble. And I go play your video game, watch TV. Leave me alone. I gotta smoke a bowl and and fart in the barn or something. Whatever parents go off and do. In the case of the school, if you have a zero tolerance policy, you don't have to worry about figuring out what's going on, who started it, what instigated the situation. You don't have to worry about justice. You don't have to worry about due process. You don't have to worry about gathering facts and coming to a rational, logical, and fair and just conclusion.
Hashtag me too, because it's all about identity. I'm a woman, therefore oppressed and a victim.
Why are you singing?
Because I can. Shut up. I'm a woman. I'm a victim. Stop oppressing me.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's about efficiency and the path of least resistance.
Yeah, if I can get him or anybody to shut up just by saying 3 simple little words, there's the control and the path of least resistance.
Yep. I mean, God forbid we raise people to think, to understand the value of educating,
We don't need
and actually to understand the value of knowledge and the difference it can make in your life. Because knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. And we don't teach that kind of stuff anymore. Really, we ought to have some philosophy in schools again. We ought to have
civics.
art. That's part of the wonderful thing of the art programs that keep getting cut, is that you take something like music or like or like a visual art. There's a whole rich history involved there, so it reinforces the history education. With arts and with visual arts and music, there is technique and process and whatnot, and that reinforces a science type education.
Well, the same thing could be said about any kind of craftable trade. Leather, woodworking.
Yeah, those
Metal.
are arts. Those are the arts. I don't care. They won't tell you it's the arts because they don't know what they're talking about. But there's an artistic element to that stuff. It's not just a craft. It's not just knowing how to join 2 pieces of wood without nails to get a tight
Notice
and permanent fit.
that people who have hobbies, like actual hobbies, are less likely to complain about this identity stuff than those who don't.
Yeah,
Again,
a
it comes
little.
back to that self-worth from within and not from without. Because
it's-
again, you're doing something.
There's also the thing with their hobby is the way they're identifying in some cases, I think.
Yeah.
Did we just come full circle back to the passive versus active?
Maybe. But my point is, there's language skills also in music and the visual arts. There's
And math.
what?
And math.
Yes.
There is mathematics and music.
Yeah, mathematics. I usually classify the mathematics under the science heading because there are formulas involved with. Just watch Bob Ross. He uses a formula.
Well,
Every
yeah,
time.
but now you skipped from music to the visual arts, but that's okay.
Well, no,
it's
I'm
still a
talking
science.
about them both in the overall heading of arts. my point is the education in arts gives you a way to reinforce all the fact-based education, the spelling, the English lit, the mathematics, the science, the history.
For design, it would be
all of
line
those
work, it would be texture, it would be shading, it would be form. Yes.
All of those things are reinforced by the arts, and it gives the brain an opportunity to sort of examine those things, and the brain consciously does not know it's doing this. You don't know it's happening, but it is happening. When you are exercising that part of your brain that does the arts, it's reinforcing the stuff that you learned that is all the facts, and vice versa as well. It's all about building those patterns in the brain. And when those patterns get reinforced, I think you come away from a school system like that with a much more rounded individual. One who is less likely to fly off the handle because they were one French fry short of a six-pack, or whatever that expression is.
Six.
I think happy
I
meal,
don't know.
but okay.
I'm mixed metaphors. It's out of the frying pan and into the lion's den.
For somebody like me, I might be a girl, but I was always a tomboy or tomboyish growing up. Didn't really have many friends until getting into the end of middle school, high school. So gaming and art was my thing. And here I am. When the whole Gamergate thing happened back in 2014, I was on the side of, this crazy Zoe Quinn person is in the wrong. If you don't you earn your marks of your product by marketing it, not with sleeping with the journalists. And then that whole thing kicked off, and it opened my eyes. Things like that opened my eyes more to just being more observant of, okay, what is going on? Why are things happening? And it's actually helped me, or allowed me, the perspective of, let me get as many sides of the story as possible to collaborate as much information as possible to come to what I believe is my conclusive reasoning. But you have to be able to have the patience and the ability of reason to do so, and that takes practice. You're never gonna get it right the first time. Hell, you're never gonna get it right like 20 times. But like with anything else, going into, like with the arts, practice. Unfortunately, for people who are reliant on self-validity and gratification from outside and not from within, is they don't develop that patience.
Nope, they don't.
And that's why they're so quick. Why the path of least resistance for them is, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and
it's racist.
Racist.
I'm sorry.
It must be a duck. It's like, well, wait a minute. There are many kind of birds that look like a duck but are not ducks.
Goose.
Well, and not just geese, though.
Oh, goose is right.
You have swans.
Swan, yeah.
Swan. I was about to say swine, but that's definitely not a...
Well, yeah, that'll work, but only when
Definitely
pigs fly. Oh, thank you. I'll be here all week. Oh, that was terrible. I feel so bad for that one. It's funny, the whole thing about internal versus external, because there's that whole empowerment thing that drives me crazy. When the feminists talk about being empowered, I don't like the concept, because I think it's bad for women.
It's not. You're not empowered because you're a woman. You're empowered because of things that you do.
Well, yeah.
You're not empowered because you're black. You're empowered because of the things you do.
No, don't be empowered. Empowered suggests that some external force is granting you the power.
Yeah.
And any external force that gives you power can take it away. Don't be empowered, be powerful.
Right.
Oh, I like that.
It's much more important to be powerful. Now, being powerful doesn't mean you're big and shouty and screechy all the time. Sometimes being powerful means standing there and watching someone exhaust themselves, like Rocky Balboa did in the fighting ring. You know, they get in there, hey, come on, you're not so bad. You're not so bad. And you keep getting punched in the face, and they say I'm a little punchy. I don't know, you know. And you wear your opponent out by not fighting, and then when they're worn out, you come in with your knowledge bomb. And you know, but you know, that's if you want to wreck someone, also, and it's not always about wrecking someone, because think about it: if we run into these people, these identitarians, do we really think we're going to change their minds in one conversation?
Not in 10.
No, never. It just like with anything, it takes practice and patience. Sometimes you just can't. You just can't. It's like talking to a brick wall with some of these people. But if you're patient enough, eventually you'll find somebody who comes across who is apprehensive of some of the things that you say, but want to understand you. And keeping an open mind will allow you to convey your sentiments, your views, that will then convince them. Convince is not the right word. Will allow them to weigh.
It will show them.
It will show them more than what they've been exposed to.
Right.
So there is a sense of narrow-minded with this, because I've had people, it completely baffles me because I've never actually encountered it before, where somebody would actually say something to the effect that there are no other opinions. Your ideas aren't even views. And it confuses me because conceptually, an idea that's formed in the mind is that. It's an idea. You can't say that it's not. So it's really confusing to me that they just dismiss out of hand anything that is not positively what's in their head.
Yeah, it's not reinforcing their position.
Right.
And there's the only cure for that is my position on free speech, I think, which is free speech is great because it lets the assholes reveal themselves for who they are, while you're saved the trouble of doing all the legwork.
Sunlight being the best disinfectant to know.
Yeah, pretty much. But there really is a lot of truth to that. I say, you know, if that person wants to be that way, go ahead. I'm all for it. But I'm going over here.
This kind of comes back to a couple of other comments I've made off on the side to you, Wesley. There's some things that I've learned on my time on the internet where with certain types of people that are irrational, sometimes it's actually more effective. Not that you have to, it's just something that I found effective for me. Just give them a quick little mock and move along. There's nothing worse to them than maybe I'm not saying this right, but there's nothing worse than allowing them the free rent space in your head. But if you mock them and move about your day, it means that you really don't invest too much in them to give them a little jab and then keep doing what you're doing.
Well,
and it drives them batshit crazy that you don't take them seriously enough to engage with. It was like, well, when you act like a dipshit, it's just as effective as profanity, right, Mitch?
Well, I have my methods.
Well, but that's the correlation I'm trying to make. Sometimes it's easy enough to pick out some of these people because they will use the same verbiage, the same technology. They all kind of just repeat. They're just on repeat. They're just on repeat.
Yep.
But like I said, there will be times where one or two people will actually stop to investigate for themselves, much like I did. I'm not going to get into specifics, but much like I did with what happened with you uh, last year. You know, I took the time to reach out because I wanted to understand what was going on, and I was observing what other people had commented about you, and I was like, no, I want to see and I want to give as these people a chance to make their case, and I will decide for myself. Thank you. Unfortunately, it got me banned off of Twitter, so I used my good friend Frame to do all my
To
promotion.
transmit your messages.
Exactly. But I, other than losing my Twitter account, I just go about my day. It's easy just to watch them fall apart. It's fun to me. I'm sorry. Here comes my trollish side out. It's fun to watch them stumble over themselves sometimes because now you can use it as an example for other people of why this mentality is a bad thing. I'm not going to go too far into the politics, but I actually have had a smile from ear to ear over the last 24 hours because of how the Democratic Party has handled the Iowa caucus and has just been tearing itself apart. It's like, this is what you get when you play with these kind of politics. Instead of being polite and civil, you want to be brash and rude, and you think that's acceptable. People call it stunning and brave. But average Joe Schmo down the street
You know, there's
doesn't want to
nothing,
be preached to.
there's nothing brave about being an asshole in a country loaded with free speech. My God. See, overall, I figure give everyone a chance. Uh, give some people too. But after that, make them earn it. You know, I don't mean like sit them there, you got to earn. No, you don't have to engage to make them earn it. You know, if they want to continue to be a jerk after you've given them a couple of chances, well, just don't give them the opportunity to be a jerk to you.
Now, the warning to that caveat is they will try to use that to paint you in a negative light. And all you can sit there and do is just be as transparent as possible. It's like, yeah, you're being an asshole to me. Why shouldn't I be an asshole back to you? Because sometimes people like that, because they are manipulative. If that's anything, they're good at trying to be manipulative.
Well, they're good at trying.
Well, they're good at trying, I guess. They will try to use your moralities against you. They will try to use your moralities against you and say, oh, you prostrate yourself as a Christian, but yet you do X, Y, and Z. Hypocrite. And they will try to bring you down to your knees to apologize, to justify yourself. And if they can get you to do that, now they are exercising their whatever modicum of power they think they have over you. And the simple answer is find your own way of not letting them. What works for me works for me. What works for Mitch works for Mitch. The great thing about
I just divorced myself emotionally.
That's generally the best way of doing it. I can say that for me, it was more entwined. More than half of the people that were coming after me were my friends, people I've actually, over the course of 2 or 3 years, have we had good relationships talking about any other subjects, and so it was quite enmeshed. It wasn't just 50, 100, 1,000 morons on Twitter behind keyboards. It was people who actually meant something to me, and so yes, it's true that the way that people were approaching me, I gave them too much attention. But at the same time, I also sat back and at least in my mind, I wanted to make sure that those who wanted to hear me, I mean, really hear me, could, because I was actually saying something substantive. I wasn't even necessarily speaking to those who weren't willing to listen, but for onlookers. I've actually had many people who don't want to get involved in the conversations reach out to me privately, which is the good healthy boundaries there, and people who are on all kinds of wavelengths concerning thoughts, and they'll have a conversation with me and they will say, "Hey, you're not an asshole," and I'll be like, "Yep."
Be like, I know. No, it's a funny thing, man. It's a liberating thing when you learn how to do it. When you learn how to use the words "I don't care," or, well, I don't want to get into that. That gets into a rather interesting philosophy of mine. But when you can, what is it? It's not just divorcing yourself from it. There was a trick I used on my niece when she was really little. She started doing that whole why thing, asking why no matter what answer I gave.
Why?
Exactly.
Why?
And I said to her, "Sorry, that doesn't work on me."
Why?
And she got confused and never did it again.
Why?
And I lived happily ever after in peace.
And because he's not acknowledging it.
And I have to wonder, would that work on some of these people too? If they just like rush into your face and start calling you a racist, if you stop and go, "Sorry, but that doesn't work on me," and then just go about your business, what would they do? How would they know how to react to that?
Well, I can already make a prediction is if it doesn't work on you, then they'll try to rally other people against you. But if you continue on the whole, that doesn't work on me, eventually they'll turn their attention to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, they want to get a rise out of someone as much as we do when we get into that mood. When we want to bait someone, and we're better at it than they are. When we want to bait them and draw them in and get them to reveal themselves for what they are and allow us to maintain the high ground at the same time, man, that's a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. And it really is. And they want to do the same thing, except they don't actually have a high ground. I mean, my high ground is that my sense of morality and ethics derives specifically from the Bill of Rights, so I can always point to something and say, "Oh yeah, right here, this thing, the Me Too thing doesn't work because it violates the concept of due process, and the right to face the accuser and the right to a fair trial, yada yada yada." And like, what? You don't believe in that stuff? Because who's going to admit that they're pro-tyranny? Well, nowadays, a lot
some of them.
will.
Yeah, because that's stunning and brave.
That's
I totally want to take away your rights. I want to take away your.
That's what the white race, that the imperialist colonist, and it just, okay, yeah, I know it is. It also works. Go away. Go to the top of a tall building. Go right to the edge and have a seat. Look out over the landscape before you, and have a deep thought about how you could be of use in the world, and then turn around, walk down the stairs, and go about your life.
You took that from Arthur. But it works.
Yes, it works. Because it's a good bit.
It is a very good bit. You know what? You should put that on a t-shirt. I bet people.
What, it's a good bit?
No, well, yes, that too. But the whole thing, and you start off with the bolded. Here comes my designer parts out. You start off with the biggest text being, "I want you to go to the top of a tall building and stand on the edge." And then as you explain the situation, the text gets smaller and smaller. Yes. And it has the same kind of emphasis. Yes. Oh my god. Unfortunately, I've had those moments, and this is again something that I've had. You learn some things. I've had the moments in my earlier trolling days where I would get countered for defending somebody that the mainstream comic industry and people within, or game industry, or movies, or whatever. I would make a comment in their defense, and I would get turned around on. It's like, well, if you were a woman, it's like, I am a woman. Well, then you have internalized misogyny. It's like, so up until a second ago, it was just regular misogyny, but then when you found out it was a woman, it's internal misogyny. How does that work? And I'm sorry.
Oh, what a quick and convenient diagnosis, doctor.
What part of this was women are strong enough to make their own opinions, but I'm not strong enough to make mine?
Not if it disagrees with them.
Yep. Oh, it's well, again, more tactics. 'Cause some of it does come down to tactics. I mean, and it's sad that it has to, but it does. There's the Life of Brian approach, and then there's the Doctor Who approach. If someone, when they get into your face and start screaming that you're a racist, you just sort of, sometimes you just have to look at them in a half confused manner. Go, what, me? And they'll go, yes, and you go, oh, thank you very much, and walk on. Just go about your day. Seriously, let them figure it out. It's, once you're out of range, it's no longer your concern.
Right.
And the Doctor Who approach is, when they get into your face again with the usual stuff, you just go, oh, that's nice, thanks, and off you go. I mean, really, if you can just confuse them, even just for a couple of seconds, it gives you time to get far enough away where they're going to go, yeah, but it's not worth it. And to hell with them anyway. They just want to be disruptive, and don't let them disrupt you. It's the best thing you can do. I mean, I understand your situation was different. Because when it comes to a bunch of people who are supposed to be your friends, you really have to. Again, it's a thing that sucks, and I hate these things that suck because they suck. But you gotta realize that you're free to make new friends. You don't have to accept that your old friends are now enemies, because one day they may come around, and it's always better to have that hand open.
It is very.
For a nice slap in the face, you mean? Ah!
No, if necessary, sure, but only if necessary.
True.
I mean, if they continue to approach you after the friendship is not really dissolved, but sort of on hiatus, and they keep approaching you with that stuff, just do what you can to get out of the situation and go about your day. That's where the tactics come in. And when they finally come around, like, hey, we don't talk anymore, and you wonder why? I'll tell you. I've been stewing on it for 14 years. I'll tell you damn well why we don't talk anymore. And that's where the friendship will either regrow or completely wither and die. And it's fine either way, because you don't want to waste time
With people who are not interested in being part of your life.
You don't want to waste time on people who don't really care about you. I mean, spend that time on people where you can have an effect on them and they can have an effect on you, and it's a positive thing each way. I mean, make the best use of that time. Don't spend it on people who are just going to make your life miserable. It's not worth it.
I agree. Thank you so much for throwing some thoughts out there for me, and I've actually really enjoyed the conversation. I need to step out at this point. That you two are obviously free to continue talking, but I want to actually follow up with what you were saying there and go spend some time with my wife before she falls asleep.
Oh, good call.
We'll talk some more later, and you're always welcome. My DMs are always open. I'm sure Mitch is pretty much the same way.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, if you have any other questions or want to chew off our ears with some more food for thought, we're here.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you, folks.
You're very welcome.
Have a good night, man.
Good night.